The stagecoach that carried Theresa Morgan away from San Antonio rattled over every rock and rut in the dusty Texas road. But she barely felt the jolts anymore, because the pain in her chest overshadowed everything else. Her father's final words still echoed in her mind, spoken through clenched teeth while her mother sobbed in the parlor, telling her she had brought disgrace upon their respectable family name and could never return home. The year was 1878, and unmarried women who found themselves with child were cast out like lepers, no matter the circumstances that led to their condition. Theresa pressed her hand against her still flat stomach and watched the landscape blur past the window, each mile taking her further from everything she had ever known. She was 21 years old, educated at a proper ladies' academy, and had believed herself in love with Marcus Thornhill, the charming banker's son who had promised her marriage after stealing her innocence in the garden behind the church. When she told him about the baby, his face had transformed from tender affection to cold calculation in an instant. Within a week, he was engaged to the mayor's daughter, and Theresa's reputation lay in tatters. Marcus had told everyone she had thrown herself at him shamelessly, and society believed the man's word over hers without question. Her father, a prominent lawyer, could not bear the scandal, and so she was being sent to her mother's distant cousin in Laredo, Texas, a rough border town where no one knew the Morgan name. The journey took 3 days, and Theresa spent most of it in silence, sharing the cramped stage with a whiskey salesman who reeked of his own product and an elderly woman who kept a suspicious eye on her the entire time. When they finally rolled into Laredo's dusty Main Street, Theresa stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk and looked around at the sun-bleached buildings and the Rio Grande glittering in the distance. The town was smaller and rougher than San Antonio, filled with cowboys, Mexican vaqueros, ranchers, and the occasional soldier from Fort McIntosh. She clutched her carpetbag tighter and waited for someone to meet her, but no one came. After an hour of standing in the blazing afternoon sun, Theresa finally approached the stage depot clerk, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth. He checked his papers and shook his head. Mrs. Adelaide Humphreys had passed away 2 weeks earlier from fever, and no one had thought to send word north. Theresa felt her knees go weak, and she gripped the counter to steady herself. She had exactly $4.30 to her name. No family, no prospects, and a baby growing inside her that would soon become impossible to hide. The clerk must have seen something desperate in her face, because his expression softened slightly. He told her there was a boarding house 2 streets over run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who sometimes took in women without asking too many questions. Theresa thanked him and made her way through the dusty streets, acutely aware of the stares she received. Her traveling dress, though simple, was finer than most of what she saw on the women here, and she knew she stood out like a peacock in a chicken coop. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a sharp-eyed Chinese woman who had married an Irish prospector and been widowed within a year. She looked Theresa up and down with an assessing gaze that seemed to see straight through to her secrets. The room was $2 a week, payable in advance, and Theresa could work in the kitchen to cover meals. With few other options, Theresa agreed, handing over half her remaining money and following Mrs. Chen upstairs to a tiny room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the alley. That first night, Theresa lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the border town. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played badly, men shouted in Spanish and English, and dogs barked at the moon. She thought about throwing herself in the Rio Grande and ending this misery before it got worse, but something stubborn in her refused to give Marcus Thornhill that satisfaction. She would survive this somehow, and she would prove that her life had value beyond what society dictated. The next morning, she woke before dawn to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the boarders. There were 6 men living there, mostly ranch hands and one aging shopkeeper, and they ate with the single-minded focus of people who performed hard physical labor. Theresa kept her eyes down and served quietly, but she felt their curious glances. After the meal, Mrs. Chen put her to work scrubbing floors, and Theresa attacked the task with determination, grateful to have something to occupy her hands and mind. A week passed in this manner, and Theresa's money dwindled to nothing despite her work covering meals. She needed proper employment, but respectable jobs for women were scarce in a town like Laredo, and the indecent opportunities made her stomach turn. She asked at the general store, the millinery, and even the hotel, but no one needed help. The town was full of desperate people trying to make their way in the world, and she had no special skills that set her apart. On the 8th day, Mrs. Chen sent her to the market to buy vegetables. Theresa walked through the dusty plaza where Mexican women sold produce from their gardens and chickens squawked in wooden cages. She was examining tomatoes when she heard a commotion behind her. A massive horse, a beautiful bay stallion, had broken free from its hitching post and was rearing up, scattering people in all directions. A small boy, perhaps 5 years old, stood frozen in terror directly in the animal's path. Theresa did not think. She simply moved, dropping her basket and running forward. She grabbed the child and threw herself sideways, landing hard on the packed earth with the boy clutched against her chest. The horse's hooves came down exactly where they had been standing, and then a tall figure was there, catching the trailing reins and speaking in low, calm tones that gradually settled the panicked animal. Theresa sat up slowly, checking the crying child for injuries. His mother rushed over, sobbing her thanks in rapid Spanish, gathering her son into her arms and blessing Theresa repeatedly. Strong hands helped Theresa to her feet, and she found herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that brushed his collar. He wore dusty range clothes and a battered hat, and there was a gentleness in his face that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that suggested he had been born somewhere in Texas. "That was mighty brave, but mighty foolish. Could have gotten yourself killed. The child would have been trampled." Theresa brushed dust from her skirt with shaking hands, only now realizing how close she had come to disaster. "I could not simply stand and watch." "No, I reckon you could not." He studied her with open curiosity, and Theresa felt herself flush under his gaze. "Name's Xavier Anderson." "That's my horse what caused all the trouble. Spooked by a snake, but that's no excuse for breaking his training. You sure you are all right? You are bleeding." Theresa looked down and saw that her palms were scraped raw from the fall, and her dress was torn at the shoulder. Xavier pulled a clean bandana from his pocket and gently wrapped it around her worst hand, his touch careful and precise. She found herself acutely aware of his nearness, the way he smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat, nothing like the cloying cologne Marcus had always worn. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." She took her hand back and stepped away, uncomfortable with how her heart was racing. "I should retrieve my vegetables. They are scattered to kingdom come, I am afraid." Xavier glanced around at the spilled produce. "Least I can do is replace them and buy you dinner besides. Nearly getting killed by a man's horse entitles you to a meal, seems to me." Theresa started to refuse automatically, then realized she was hungry and lonely, and tired of being alone with her dark thoughts. Xavier Anderson had kind eyes, and surely one meal could do no harm. She nodded, and his face lit up with a genuine smile that transformed his serious features into something approaching handsome. He took her to a small restaurant run by a Mexican family, where the food was simple but delicious. Over plates of beans, rice, and tender beef, Xavier told her about his ranch. It was a modest spread about 10 miles outside of town, where he raised cattle and broke horses. He had inherited it from his uncle 5 years earlier, when he was 23, and had been working himself to the bone ever since trying to make it prosper. He had 2 hands who helped with the heavy work, but he needed someone to manage the household, do the cooking, and keep the place from falling into complete bachelor squalor. Had a housekeeper up until last month, he explained, sopping up beans with a tortilla. Mrs. Gonzalez was a treasure, but her daughter had a baby and needed help, so she moved to El Paso. Been trying to find a replacement ever since, but most women do not want to live that far from town, and the ones who do are already spoken for. Theresa's mind was racing. This could be the answer to her prayers. A job with room and board included, far enough from town that her eventual condition might go unnoticed for a while longer. But she also knew that her situation made such an arrangement scandalous. A single woman living alone with a bachelor rancher would set tongues wagging, even in rough Laredo. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier added, "Course, it would have to be proper. You would have your own cabin, the one Mrs. Gonzalez used. It has a good stove and a solid door with a lock. I do not hold with anything improper, and I would make sure everyone knew you were an employee, nothing more. You do not know anything about me." Theresa set down her fork and met his eyes directly. "I could be a terrible cook. I could be fleeing the law. I could be a woman of poor character. You threw yourself in front of a horse to save a child you did not know." Xavier's voice was steady and certain. "That tells me what I need to know about your character. The rest we can figure out as we go. I am a good judge of people, miss. I am sorry. I never got your name." "Theresa Morgan." She took a deep breath. "And there are things about my situation that might make you reconsider your offer if you knew them. Are you running from the law? No. Are you married to someone who might show up and cause trouble? No. Then whatever else it is, we can manage." Xavier leaned back in his chair, his expression open and honest. "I am not going to pry into your business, Miss Morgan. Everyone who comes to the border is running from something. What matters is what you do from here forward, not what you left behind. Job pays $30 a month plus room and board. You would have Sundays off, and I would drive you to town anytime you needed to go. What do you say?" $30 a month was more than generous for housekeeping work, and Theresa suspected Xavier was being deliberately charitable. She should refuse on principle, should not accept such kindness from a stranger, but desperation made her practical. In a few months, she would be unable to hide her pregnancy, and she needed to be established somewhere safe before that happened. Perhaps out on the ranch, she could keep her secret a little longer. Perhaps she could save enough money to eventually move somewhere she could claim to be a widow. Perhaps. "When would you need me to start?" "Tomorrow, if you are willing. I can bring a wagon to collect you and your things." "I do not have many things." Theresa thought of her single carpet bag upstairs at the boarding house. Tomorrow would be acceptable. They shook hands across the table, and Theresa felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. Xavier Anderson had just offered her a lifeline without asking for anything in return, and she found herself wanting to trust him despite all her recent experience with men. He was different from Marcus, she told herself. He had to be. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Xavier arrived at the boarding house driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. Mrs. Chen watched with sharp eyes as Theresa settled her account, and thanked her for the hospitality. The older woman pulled her aside for a moment and spoke in a low voice. "That man has a good reputation, works hard, treats people fair, goes to church most Sundays. But you are a young woman alone and you must be smart. Keep your door locked and your wits about you." "I will. Thank you for everything." Theresa impulsively hugged the older woman, who stiffened in surprise before patting her back awkwardly. The ride out to Xavier's ranch took nearly 2 hours, following a well-worn trail that wound through scrubby grassland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. Xavier kept up an easy commentary, pointing out landmarks and neighboring ranches, telling stories about the land and the people who worked it. Theresa found herself relaxing despite her nervousness, drawn in by his calm presence and obvious love for this harsh country. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained. The main house was a low adobe structure with a wide porch, built in the Mexican style to stay cool in the brutal summer heat. About 50 yards away stood a smaller cabin, also adobe, with a neat vegetable garden beside it. There were several corrals, a barn, and a bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed. Everything spoke of hard work and careful management, a place built by someone who intended to stay. Xavier helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag to the cabin. Inside, it was simple but clean, with a rope bed, a table and chairs, a wood stove, and shelves for storage. The previous occupant had left curtains at the windows and a rag rug on the floor. It was the first space Theresa had been able to call her own in weeks, and she felt an unexpected lump form in her throat. "I will give you time to settle in," Xavier said, setting her bag on the bed. "Come over to the main house when you are ready and I will show you around properly. No rush." After he left, Theresa sat on the bed and let herself cry for the first time since leaving San Antonio. She cried for the life she had lost, for her parents who had sent her away, for the baby growing inside her who would be born without a father's name. But when the tears finally stopped, she felt something shift inside her. This was a new start, exactly as Xavier had offered. She could be someone different here, someone stronger than the naive girl who had believed Marcus Thornhill's lies. She washed her face in the basin, changed into her other dress, and walked over to the main house. Xavier met her at the door and gave her a tour. The house had 4 rooms, a large main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms, and a small office where Xavier kept his accounts. The place desperately needed a woman's touch, with dust in every corner and dishes piled in the washing basin, but the bones were good. "I am not expecting miracles," Xavier said apologetically. "Just keeping me and the hands fed and the place from being overrun by mice would be a blessing. Mrs. Gonzalez used to do laundry on Mondays, baking on Wednesdays, and mending whenever needed, but you organize it however makes sense to you." They established a routine quickly. Theresa would prepare breakfast before dawn for Xavier and his 2 ranch hands, Miguel and Tom. The men would eat quickly and head out to work, often not returning until dark. She would spend her days cleaning, cooking, and managing the household, grateful for the hard work that kept her from thinking too much. Xavier was respectful and kind, treating her like a valued employee rather than a servant. He always thanked her for meals, asked if she needed anything from town, and never once made her feel uncomfortable. As weeks turned into a month, then 2, Theresa found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to make bread in the finicky wood stove, to stretch tough beef into tender meals, to judge when the hands would need extra food during particularly hard work. Miguel's wife, Rosa, came by occasionally with eggs and vegetables, and she taught Theresa how to make proper tortillas. The Mexican woman was kind and did not ask questions about Theresa's past, though her dark eyes were knowing. Xavier continued to be nothing but a gentleman. He often worked late in his office, going over accounts and breeding records by lamplight. Sometimes Theresa would bring him coffee, and they would talk for a few minutes about the ranch or the weather or news from town. She learned that he had grown up in Houston, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come west seeking his own place in the world. His uncle had been a hard man but fair, and had taught him everything about ranching before dying unexpectedly of a heart ailment. "Never thought I would end up a cattleman," Xavier admitted one evening, accepting the coffee cup with grateful hands. "Planned to be a doctor, actually. Studied for 2 years in Galveston before my uncle wrote saying he needed help. Figured I would come for 1 season, but then he died and left me the place. Could not bear to sell it after all his work building it up." "Do you regret not finishing your medical studies?" Theresa asked, fascinated by this glimpse into his past. "Sometimes. But there's a satisfaction in this work too, building something with your hands, watching the herd grow, improving the bloodlines year by year. And I can still help people in small ways. Delivered a few calves and foals, stitched up a few wounds. Not the same as being a real doctor, but it is something." Theresa thought about that conversation often in the days that followed. Xavier Anderson was nothing like the men she had known in San Antonio. He was educated but not pretentious, strong but gentle, ambitious but not ruthless. She caught herself watching for his return each evening, listening for his step on the porch, and had to sternly remind herself that she had no business developing feelings for her employer. She was pregnant with another man's child, disgraced and ruined in the eyes of society. Xavier deserved better than a woman with her past, but her heart did not seem to understand logic. When Xavier smiled at her over dinner, praising her cooking or telling a funny story about his day, she felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. When he insisted on fixing the loose board on her cabin porch, working shirtless in the afternoon sun, she found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders. And when he brought her wildflowers he had found while riding the range, presenting them awkwardly like a schoolboy, she pressed them between the pages of her only book and treasured them like gold. 3 months into her employment, Theresa could no longer hide the changes in her body. Her dresses were getting tight around the middle, and she had taken to wearing an apron tied high to disguise her growing belly. She knew she could not keep the secret much longer, and the knowledge filled her with dread. Xavier had been so kind, had given her this sanctuary, and she was going to repay him by bringing scandal to his doorstep. The decision was taken out of her hands on a hot afternoon in late August. She was hanging laundry when a wave of dizziness overtook her. She grabbed for the clothesline to steady herself but missed, crumpling to the ground in a dead faint. When she came to, she was lying on the sofa in Xavier's main room, with Rosa pressing a cool cloth to her forehead and Xavier hovering nearby, his face creased with worry. "The baby needs you to rest more," Rosa said gently in accented English, not bothering to pretend she had not noticed. "You work too hard in this heat. Is not good." Theresa looked at Xavier, expecting to see shock or disgust or anger, but his expression was only concerned. He knelt beside the sofa and took her hand carefully. "How far along?" he asked quietly. 4 months, nearly 5. Theresa's voice cracked. "I should have told you before you hired me. I am sorry. I will leave as soon as I am able to travel. I understand that I have deceived you and stop." Xavier's voice was firm but not unkind. "You are not going anywhere. You need rest and proper care, and you are going to get both right here." "Rosa, what does she need?" The older woman rattled off a list. More frequent meals, iron-rich foods, less time on her feet, no heavy lifting. Xavier listened intently and nodded. When Rosa finally left, promising to return the next day with special tea and advice, Xavier pulled a chair over and sat down, still holding Theresa's hand. "Tell me what happened. Only if you want to, but I think it might help to talk about it." So Theresa told him everything. About Marcus and his promises, about the betrayal and the lies, about her parents sending her away in disgrace. Xavier listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively darker as the story unfolded. When she finished, she was crying again, but these tears felt cleansing rather than bitter. "That man is a coward and a villain," Xavier said when she fell silent, "and your parents failed you when you needed them most. I am sorry you went through that alone. It was my own fault for being so naive. I should have known better than to trust him." "No." Xavier's voice was sharp enough to make her look up. "He lied to you and used you and then destroyed your reputation to protect his own. That is not your fault, Theresa. That is all on him." Hearing him say it, with such conviction, loosened something tight in Theresa's chest. She had carried the shame and guilt for so long, had accepted society's judgment that she was the one at fault, that hearing someone defend her felt revolutionary. "What will you do when people find out?" she asked. "The scandal will touch you too. People will say terrible things about you keeping a pregnant, unmarried woman on your ranch. Let them talk. I know the truth, and anyone whose opinion matters to me will understand. You are under my protection now, and that means something in this country." Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "I want you to stay, Theresa, not as an employee if you do not feel able to work, but as someone under my care. You and the baby both. Stay until you have figured out what you want to do next. Stay as long as you need to." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Because someone should be, and because over these past months you have become important to me. I look forward to seeing you every morning, to talking with you in the evenings. The ranch feels like a home now instead of just a place I work. That is because of you." Theresa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Xavier, I cannot offer you anything. I am carrying another man's child. I am ruined in the eyes of the world. I do not care about the world's eyes. I care about what I see, and I see a brave, strong woman who has survived things that would have broken someone weaker. I see someone with a good heart and quick hands and a smile that makes my whole day better when I catch a glimpse of it." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "I am saying this all wrong. I am a rancher, not a poet, but what I am trying to say is that I have feelings for you, Theresa. Real feelings. And I think maybe you feel something for me too. Am I wrong about that?" "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. "You are not wrong. But Xavier, you could have any woman you wanted, someone without my history, someone who could give you children of your own blood. I want you. And I will love that baby like my own if you will let me. Not trying to rush you or pressure you. I know you have been hurt, and trust does not come easy after that. I am just saying that I am here and I am not going anywhere, and when you are ready, I will be waiting." He stood then, releasing her hand, and told her to rest for the remainder of the day. He would prepare dinner for himself and the hands. Theresa lay on the sofa long after he left, her mind whirling. A man who was not the father wanted to claim her child, wanted to claim her, despite everything. It seemed impossible, a fairy tale too good to be true. And yet Xavier Anderson had never been anything but honest with her. If he said he meant it, then he meant it. The next weeks were a strange and precious time. Xavier insisted she rest more, and he hired Rosa to come 3 days a week to help with the heavier work. Theresa still cooked and managed the household, but at a gentler pace. Xavier brought her books from town, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and read or talk as the sun set over the scrubland. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to introduce new breeding stock, about maybe starting a horse-breaking business on the side. She told him about her childhood in San Antonio, about her mother's garden and her father's law books, carefully editing out the painful ending. Slowly, carefully, they were building something between them. Xavier never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He did not try to kiss her or touch her beyond the occasional hand-holding. He was courting her, she realized, in the most old-fashioned and respectful way possible. And she was falling in love with him, truly in love in a way she now understood she had never been with Marcus. What she had felt for Marcus had been infatuation, a girl's romantic fantasy. What she felt for Xavier was deeper and more real, built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. One evening in early September, Theresa was preparing dinner when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 5 riders, dusty and armed, heading toward the ranch. Her stomach clenched with instinctive fear. Xavier emerged from the barn and walked out to meet them, and she saw him stiffen as he recognized the leader. Theresa moved to the porch, straining to hear the conversation. The leader was a heavy-set man with a thick mustache and a badge on his vest, a lawman of some kind. Her heart began to pound. Had her father sent someone to find her? Was there some law against what she had done, Sheriff Kincaid? "What brings you out this way?" Xavier's voice was carefully neutral. "Got some questions about your housekeeper, Anderson. Woman named Theresa Morgan, that her on your porch there. Miss Morgan is under my employ and my protection. What is this about?" "Got a letter from a lawyer in San Antonio, fellow named Daniel Morgan. Says his daughter ran off, and he has reason to believe she might be in this area. Says she is not right in the head, needs to be returned home for proper care." The sheriff's voice was loud enough for Theresa to hear clearly, and she felt ice flood her veins. Her father was trying to have her declared insane and forcibly returned. It was a common enough tactic for families dealing with inconvenient daughters. "There is nothing wrong with Miss Morgan's mental state," Xavier said flatly. "She is a grown woman who left of her own free will. Lawyer says different, says she has delusions, makes up stories about respectable men, says she is a danger to herself." The sheriff shifted in his saddle uncomfortably. "Look, Anderson, I do not like this kind of business any more than you do, but I've got a legal letter here requesting that I locate the woman and escort her to the next train back to San Antonio. If you are harboring her against her family's wishes, that puts you in a difficult position." Theresa walked down the porch steps, her hands clenched to stop their shaking. "Sheriff, my name is Theresa Morgan. I am 21 years old, well past the age of majority. I left my father's house because I was sent away, not because of any mental deficiency. I am of sound mind, as you can clearly see, and I have no intention of returning to San Antonio." The sheriff looked her over, his expression uncomfortable. "Miss, your father is a prominent man. He has got lawyers and influence. If he says you need to come home, I am obliged to. You are obliged to enforce the law," Xavier interrupted. "And the law says an adult woman can live where she pleases. If Mr. Morgan wants to pursue this, let him come down here himself and face his daughter. But you are not taking her anywhere against her will. Anderson, do not make this harder than it needs to be. I have got 4 deputies with me, and we will take her peaceable or not. You will have to go through me first." The air crackled with tension. Theresa saw Xavier's hand drift toward the gun on his hip, saw the deputies shift nervously. This could turn violent in a heartbeat, all because of her. She could not let Xavier risk himself this way. "Wait." She stepped forward, her mind racing. "Sheriff, you said you received a letter stating I was mentally unsound. Did my father provide any evidence of this beyond his own word?" "Well, He mentioned you making accusations against a man of good character, saying things that could not be true. Let me guess. He said I claimed Marcus Thornhill seduced me with false promises of marriage, and then abandoned me when I became inconvenient. Theresa's voice was steady despite the fury building in her chest. Marcus is the son of the wealthiest banker in San Antonio and is engaged to the mayor's daughter. My father would rather believe his daughter is insane than admit a rich man could be a liar and a scoundrel. But, Sheriff, I can prove my story is true. Marcus gave me letters, love letters where he wrote about our future together. I kept them. They are in my bag in my cabin. You can see his handwriting, his promises, all in his own hand. This was a lie. She had destroyed Marcus's letters in a fit of rage before leaving San Antonio, but she was gambling that the sheriff would not want to pursue this any further if given an easy way out. Escorting unwilling women at the behest of powerful fathers was not pleasant work, especially when the woman in question was clearly sane and articulate. The sheriff scratched his jaw. You have got letters, written by Marcus Thornhill himself. I can fetch them right now if you would like to see them. That would not prove anything, one of the deputies muttered. Could be forgeries. Then I suggest you take one back to San Antonio and have a handwriting expert compare it to other samples of Mr. Thornhill's writing, Theresa said coolly. I am certain my father would be happy to pay for such an analysis. And while we are at it, perhaps we should ask why a supposedly mentally unsound woman is able to maintain employment as a housekeeper, manage a household, and speak as rationally as I am speaking now. If my father truly believes I am insane, let him petition the courts properly with evidence and doctor's testimony. But I suspect he will not, because he knows I am perfectly sane. He simply wants me hidden away before my condition becomes obvious. She saw realization dawn on the sheriff's face as he noticed the slight swell of her belly beneath her apron. His expression shifted from official duty to something more sympathetic. He had probably seen this story play out before, respectable families disposing of embarrassing daughters. I will tell your father I located you and that you refuse to return, the sheriff said finally. I will mention that you appear to be of sound mind and are employed in a respectable household. What he does from there is his business. But miss, if he pushes this further, gets a judge involved, it could get ugly. If my father wants to drag this into court, I will tell my story publicly, naming names. I suspect Marcus Thornhill's future father-in-law would be very interested to know about his soon-to-be son-in-law's character. Theresa was bluffing, knowing such a scandal would hurt her more than it would hurt Marcus, but the sheriff did not need to know that. Thank you for your understanding, Sheriff. I am sorry you rode all this way for nothing. The lawmen turned their horses and rode back toward town. Theresa watched them go, her knees shaking so badly she had to grab the porch railing for support. Xavier was beside her immediately, his arm around her waist, holding her up. That was incredible, he said quietly. The way you stood up to them, the way you argued your case. You were magnificent. I lied about the letters. I destroyed them months ago. I know. I am still impressed. Xavier guided her to sit on the porch steps, but he was right about one thing. Your father might push this further. You need legal protection. What kind of protection? I have no money for lawyers, and besides, my father is a lawyer himself. He knows how to manipulate the system. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. There is one way to end this permanently. If you were married, your father would have no claim on you. Your husband would be your legal guardian, and nothing your father said would matter. Theresa's heart stopped. Xavier, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. He took both her hands in his. I already told you I have feelings for you. Those have not changed. They have only gotten stronger. I want to marry you, Theresa. Not just to protect you from your father, though that is a good reason, but because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you and raise that baby as mine and maybe have more children if God is willing. Because you make me happier than I have ever been, and I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make you just as happy. Xavier. Tears were streaming down her face. Are you sure? Once we are married, there is no going back. You will be tied to me and my scandal forever. Then I will be tied to the best thing that ever happened to me. He reached up and cupped her face gently, wiping away tears with his thumbs. Marry me, Theresa. Let me be your husband and the father of your child. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved, please. Yes. The word came out choked and laughing and crying all at once. Yes, I will marry you. Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully because of the baby, and she buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed. These were not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief and joy and disbelief that something good was finally happening after months of darkness. When she finally pulled back, Xavier was smiling, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. We should do it soon, he said practically. Before your father can make more trouble. I will ride into town tomorrow and speak to the minister. Unless you want a big wedding with a white dress and all the trimmings. Because we can do that if you want, though it might take more time to arrange. No, I want simple and soon. Just us and whatever witnesses the law requires. Theresa took a shaky breath. But Xavier, people will talk. They will count the months and know the baby is not yours. They will say terrible things about both of us. Let them talk themselves hoarse. Anyone who matters will know the truth that I married the woman I love and claimed her child as mine. That is nothing to be ashamed of. He stood and pulled her up with him. Come on. We should tell Miguel and Tom. They will be happy for us, and Tom can stand up as my witness. The two ranch hands were indeed delighted by the news, congratulating Xavier with enthusiastic backslapping and treating Theresa with the careful courtesy due to the boss's future wife. Rosa, when she heard the next day, cried and hugged Theresa and immediately began planning what food should be prepared for a small celebration after the ceremony. 3 days later, on a bright September morning, Theresa Morgan became Theresa Anderson in a simple ceremony at the small church in Laredo. She wore her best dress, cleaned and mended, with wildflowers in her hair that Rosa had helped her arrange. Xavier wore a clean white shirt and a string tie, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. Tom and Rosa stood as witnesses, and the minister's wife played a wheezy organ. The ceremony was brief and matter-of-fact, but when Xavier slipped a simple gold band on her finger and kissed her gently to seal their vows, Theresa felt a joy so profound it made her dizzy. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Xavier carried her over the threshold of the main house, which was now her home. Rosa had prepared a wedding feast, and they all ate together, toasting with fresh lemonade and telling stories late into the afternoon. When the others finally left and Theresa and Xavier were alone, the atmosphere shifted to something charged and uncertain. I will sleep in my old room, Xavier said quietly. I am not expecting anything just because we are married now. You have been through a lot and you are carrying a baby. We can take this as slow as you need to. Theresa looked at this good man who had married her to protect her, who had claimed another man's child, who asked for nothing in return. She thought about Marcus, who had taken everything and given nothing, who had used her and discarded her. Xavier was offering her a marriage in name only, a safe haven without demands, and she loved him even more for it. But she also knew what she wanted. I do not want you in the other room, she said softly. I want you here with me. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. I know I am not much to look at right now with the baby, and you are beautiful." Xavier crossed the room and took her hands. "You have been beautiful to me from the day I first saw you saving that child in the market. But Theresa, I need to know you are doing this because you want to, not because you think you owe me. I want to. I want you." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "I love you, Xavier Anderson. I think I have loved you for months now, but I was too afraid to admit it. Make me your wife. Please." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and she melted into him with a sigh. This was nothing like Marcus's kisses, which had been all urgency and demands. Xavier kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world, like he wanted to memorize the taste and feel of her. When he finally picked her up and carried her to the bedroom, she went willingly, ready to start this new chapter of her life with the man she loved. The morning after their wedding, Theresa woke to find Xavier already dressed and pulling on his boots. He saw her watching and came over to kiss her forehead. "Got to check the north pasture fence. Miguel said he spotted some damage yesterday. I will be back by lunch." He hesitated. "Are you all right? I did not hurt you or the baby. We are both fine. Better than fine." She caught his hand and squeezed. "Go do your work. I will have food ready when you return." After he left, Theresa got up and dressed, marveling at how different the world looked. She was married. She was protected. She was loved. It felt like a dream, but the gold ring on her finger was real enough, and so were the memories of the previous night. Xavier had been tender and careful, making sure she felt safe and cherished. She had wept afterward, not from pain but from the overwhelming rightness of it all. The weeks that followed settled into a new pattern. Xavier still worked long days on the ranch, but now he came home to a wife who shared his bed and his table. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Theresa's belly continued to grow, and Xavier delighted in feeling the baby kick, his large hand spread across her swollen stomach, his face full of wonder. "Strong little thing," he said one evening as the baby rolled and kicked energetically. "Takes after the mother. You are going to be a wonderful father." Theresa covered his hand with hers. "This baby is blessed to have you, even if it does not share your blood. Blood is not what makes a family. Love does. And I love this little one already." Xavier leaned down and kissed her belly, talking to the baby in a soft voice about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. Theresa felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry at everything these days, but these were happy tears. In October, Theresa received a letter. It came via the stage office in town, and Xavier brought it home with the other mail. She recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope and felt her stomach clench with anxiety. She almost threw it in the fire unread, but Xavier encouraged her to at least see what it said. The letter was brief and painful. Her mother wrote that she was sorry for how things had ended, that she thought about Theresa every day and prayed for her safety. Her father refused to speak Theresa's name and had forbidden her mother from contacting her, but she was risking his anger to at least let Theresa know she was not forgotten. She had heard through her cousin in Laredo that Theresa had married a rancher, and she hoped it was true, and that Theresa had found some happiness. She enclosed a small package wrapped in tissue paper, a baby's christening gown, yellowed with age, that had been worn by 3 generations of Morgan children. Theresa held the tiny gown and cried while Xavier held her. The letter was not a reconciliation, not really, but it was something. It was a thread of connection to the family she had lost, and it soothed an ache she had been trying to ignore. "You want to write back?" Xavier asked. "I do not know if she could receive a letter without my father finding out. It might make things worse for her." Theresa folded the gown carefully. "But maybe someday, maybe when the baby is born, I will send a photograph, so she knows that we are all right." As her time drew near, Rosa came to the ranch more frequently, bringing supplies and advice. The nearest doctor was in town, too far to reach quickly if something went wrong during the birth, so Rosa would serve as midwife as she had for many women in the area. Xavier became increasingly anxious as Theresa's due date approached in early December, hovering over her and trying to prevent her from doing any work whatsoever. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Theresa protested when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife having my baby," Xavier said stubbornly. "I am allowed to worry. It is not your baby, not really." Xavier's face went hard and he cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "It is my baby. Mine. Do not ever say otherwise. I do not care who planted the seed. I am the one who will walk the floor at night when the baby cries. I am the one who will teach this child to ride and rope and read. I am the one who will be there for every skinned knee and every milestone. That makes me the father." "Understood, understood." Theresa kissed him, her heart overflowing. "I love you too. Now sit down and put your feet up. Rosa says the swelling will be less if you rest more." The baby came on a cold December night, arriving fast and furious after a labor that lasted only 6 hours. Rosa and Xavier were both there, Rosa handling the medical aspects with capable efficiency while Xavier held Theresa's hand and whispered encouragement. When the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry, Rosa cleaned it off and placed it in Theresa's arms. "A boy," she announced with a tired smile. "Strong and healthy." Theresa looked down at her son, her beautiful boy with a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that gripped her own. She had spent months terrified that she would not be able to love this baby, this living reminder of Marcus's betrayal. But the moment she held him, all those fears evaporated. This was not Marcus's son. This was her son, hers and Xavier's, the baby they would raise together. Xavier was crying unashamedly, his eyes fixed on the baby with such love that Theresa's own eyes filled with tears. "Can I hold him?" he asked hoarsely. She passed the baby to him and Xavier cradled the tiny bundle with surprising confidence. "Hello, son," he whispered. "Welcome home. I am your papa and I am going to love you every day of your life. That is a promise." They named him Thomas Xavier Anderson, after Tom who had stood up for them at their wedding, and after the man who would raise him. Little Thomas was an easy baby, sleeping in long stretches and nursing well. Xavier was besotted with him, coming in from the fields to check on him constantly, holding him in the evenings while Theresa cooked, singing him lullabies in a surprisingly decent voice. Christmas that year was the best of Theresa's life. They decorated the house with pine boughs and held Thomas up to see the candles on the small tree Xavier had cut. They exchanged simple gifts, a new shawl for Theresa, a good knife for Xavier, and felt richer than kings. On Christmas morning, they dressed Thomas in the christening gown Theresa's mother had sent and took him to church, where the minister blessed him, and the congregation welcomed the newest member of the Anderson family. New Year's Day 1879 dawned clear and cold, and Theresa stood on the porch of her home with her husband's arms around her and her son sleeping against her shoulder. She thought about where she had been a year ago, broken and desperate and alone. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and the fear and the shame. And she thought about Xavier, the compassionate cowboy who had given her a new start and his whole heart. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, his chin resting on top of her head. "How grateful I am. For you, for Thomas, for this life. A year ago I wanted to die. Now I have everything I ever wanted, more than I ever dreamed possible." "You saved yourself," Xavier said quietly. "I just gave you a safe place to land. You are the one who chose to keep going, who chose to be brave, who chose to love again even after being hurt. That is all you." "We saved each other," Theresa corrected. "This ranch was just a place you worked before I came. Now it is a home. Now it is a family. That is what we built together." Over the next year, their little family flourished. Thomas grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, laughing baby who adored his father and lit up whenever Xavier came into the room. The ranch prospered too. Xavier's careful breeding program was paying off with strong, healthy calves, and his reputation as a horse breaker spread through the region. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. In the spring of 1880, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear or shame, only joy. Xavier was over the moon, though he worried about her throughout the pregnancy despite her assurances that she felt fine. This baby was different from the first, slower to come, harder on her body. When Rosa placed a daughter in her arms in late November, Theresa was exhausted but elated. "What should we name her?" Xavier asked, holding Thomas on his lap while they all admired the new baby. "I would like to name her Adelaide," Theresa said. "After my mother's cousin who died before she could help me. If not for her, I would never have come to Laredo. I would never have met you." "Adelaide Anderson. That is a fine name. Ada for short." Xavier leaned over and kissed both his wife and his daughter. "You hear that, Thomas? You have got a little sister. You are going to have to help me keep her safe." Thomas, not quite 2 years old, stared at the baby with wide eyes and reached out to pat her head gently. "Baby," he said clearly, one of his few words. "That is right, son. Your baby sister." Watching Xavier with their children, Theresa felt a peace so deep it was almost painful. This was what family was supposed to be: love and care and protection freely given. She thought sometimes about Marcus, wondering if he ever regretted what he had done, if he ever thought about the son he did not know existed. But mostly she did not think about him at all. He was part of her past, a chapter closed and finished. Her present and her future were right here, in this adobe house by the Rio Grande, with the man she loved and the children they were raising together. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another son came in 1882, whom they named Daniel after Theresa's father in a gesture of forgiveness, though her father never acknowledged it. Then twin girls in 1885, squalling red-faced bundles that kept them all awake for months, but brought twice the joy. The ranch grew too, expanding to take in more land and more cattle. Xavier hired more hands, built a bigger barn, replaced the old adobe house with a larger wooden structure that could accommodate their growing family. Through it all, Xavier and Theresa remained deeply in love. They had their disagreements like any couple, their struggles during hard years when the rains did not come or prices dropped. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. Xavier never once threw Theresa's past in her face or treated Thomas as anything less than his firstborn son. And Theresa worked alongside him to build their legacy, managing the household finances, helping with the branding, raising their children to be strong and kind. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch, and his younger siblings in equal measure. He was 15 before he finally asked Theresa about why he looked so different from his father, why his hair was dark where Xavier's was lighter, why his features did not quite match the other children's. Theresa and Xavier sat him down together and told him the truth, that Xavier was not his biological father, but that he had chosen to be Thomas's father from before he was even born. And that choice mattered more than blood ever could. Thomas had listened quietly, processing this information with his characteristic thoughtfulness. When they finished, he looked at Xavier and said simply, "You are still my papa. That has not changed. And I am still your son. That will never change," Xavier replied, his voice thick with emotion. Thomas nodded, satisfied, and the subject was closed. He never brought it up again, and he continued to sign his name Thomas Anderson with pride. When Thomas turned 18 in 1896, ready to take on more responsibility at the ranch, Theresa and Xavier sat on their porch one evening and marveled at how fast the time had gone. Their oldest son was a man now, strong and capable. Ada was 16 and already turning heads in town, though Xavier threatened to shoot any young man who came calling with less than honorable intentions. The younger children were still underfoot, filling the house with noise and energy. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life," Theresa said, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "That scared girl who stepped off the stage in Laredo feels like a different person." "She was a different person. You have grown and changed so much over these years. But you were always brave, from that very first day when you threw yourself in front of my horse to save that child. That is what I saw in you, courage that could not be broken." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made was offering you that job. Second best decision was convincing you to marry me. You did not have to do much convincing. I was already half in love with you." Theresa smiled at the memory. "You gave me everything, Xavier. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me back my life. You gave me those things too. I was just going through the motions before you came. Working and sleeping and working some more. You showed me what I was working for, not just to build something for myself, but to build something for us, for our children, for generations to come. That is worth more than gold." In the years that followed, they watched their children grow and start families of their own. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from the next county, a practical woman named Sarah, who fit into the Anderson family as if she had always been there. Ada chose a schoolteacher from town, much to her father's relief that she had found a gentle man who would cherish her mind as much as her beauty. The younger children followed in time, each making their own way in the world while staying connected to the ranch and the family. Theresa and Xavier became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching the family they had built extend forward into the future. They faced the new century together, adapting to changes in the cattle business and the growing modernization of Texas. The ranch they had built together remained in the family, passed down through Thomas's children, a lasting legacy of what two people could create when they chose love over judgment, compassion over cruelty. On a warm spring morning in 1920, Theresa woke in the bed she had shared with Xavier for over 40 years to find him watching her with the same tender expression he had worn on their wedding night. His hair was white now, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were still the same brilliant blue that had captivated her in the market so long ago. "What are you looking at?" she asked, her own voice thin with age. "The most beautiful woman I have ever known. The love of my life, the mother of my children, my wife." Xavier reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I love you, Theresa Anderson. I have loved you from the moment you showed me what real courage looked like. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, always." She squeezed his hand and felt the solid reality of the gold band he had placed there 41 years ago. "You saved me, Xavier, not just from my father or from poverty or from society's judgment. You saved me from believing I was worthless. You showed me I deserved to be loved. You always deserved that. I just had the privilege of being the one to give it to you." They lay together in the morning light, two people who had chosen each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. When Xavier died peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, Theresa held his hand and whispered her love to him one last time. She mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the extraordinary gift he had given her: 41 years of happiness, a family that spanned generations, and the certain knowledge that she had been truly, deeply loved. Theresa herself passed away 2 years later, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who had all benefited from the love story that began when a disgraced woman stepped off a stagecoach in Laredo, and a compassionate cowboy decided to give her a new start and his whole heart. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their headstones simple but eloquent: Xavier Anderson, beloved husband and father, and Theresa Anderson, beloved wife and mother. Underneath, carved at the request of their children, were the words that best summed up their legacy: "Love builds all things." The ranch continued for generations, still in the Anderson family, still a testament to what two people created when they chose love over fear, acceptance over judgment. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, those who lived there swore they could hear laughter from the old house, the sound of Xavier and Theresa, together still, their love eternal as the Texas sky above them.